Most of my clientele is from Latin America. I'm dealing with people every day who live in countries that have a completely different liberty situation than we have in the United States. And in fact, the reason that they do business with me and that they have substantial assets in the United States is because they never know when they might have to get on a plane and with the shirts on their back and make a new life somewhere else.
So welcome everyone to the Liberty Ventures podcast. My name is Alexander McCobin, a general partner at Liberty Ventures. As a reminder, our purpose is to build an ecosystem of purpose-driven investors and entrepreneurs committed to advancing a free and prosperous future. And I am so excited to be talking to Rodolfo Milani today. As a way of background for everyone, Rodolfo is a senior managing director in the Miami office of B. Riley Wealth Management. He provides investment advice to companies and high net worth individuals throughout Latin America and the United States, with more than 40 years of experience in the industry, with previous positions at Merrill Lynch, Kidder Peabody, Donaldson, Lufkin and Jonret, Credit Suisse, Dominique and Wunderlich, and so many more. In short, you've been working with some of the biggest institutions, with some of the most impressive individuals over the last 40 years in the investment and finance space, but you do so much more than that. And just before this, we were talking about how your own story has informed your career trajectory and what you're working on now and what you want to share with people. So Rodolfo, I would love it if you would actually just give us a couple of minutes of your personal story, what's led to who you are and what you're doing today.
Thank you very much, Alexander. I certainly appreciate what you've done at Students for Liberty and other places that you've been as well. But no, I started my life in Argentina. I was born in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and my father was a tremendous influence on me. He was an anesthesiologist, but he was very unhappy with what was going on in Argentina at the time. Juan Perón was still in power when my father decided to come to the United States. And he was a doctor, but he was very, very attuned to what was going on politically in Argentina. And he saw the writing on the wall as far as what was going to happen to Argentina in the future. And although he was 38 years old, he had 4 small children, had a wife that didn't speak English. He had a wonderful position in the hospital and at the medical faculty and everything. And he left all that behind and moved the family to the United States when I was 2 years old. So I came in 1955, and I grew up in Houston, Texas, as an immigrant. Houston was kind of a bit of a redneck town when we got there, and so I grew up as an immigrant in sort of a Texas town. And from my earliest days, my father, often the immigrant experience, immigrants are more patriotic than people who were born here, because they know what it's like not to have the things that we've been blessed with here in the United States.
And you've chosen to be here.
Exactly. My father, from my earliest recollection, was always talking to me about what a great place the United States was, about the founding fathers, about the U.S. Constitution, and about how different the U.S. was than other countries, and how blessed we were to be here. And he was super, super patriotic, and he became a U.S. citizen as soon as he was able to. And he actually had to take some steps back when he first got here, because he had to get relicensed and everything to be able to work as a doctor here in the United States. So sure. It was a sacrifice for him at 38 with 4 small children, but he was a tremendous influence on me. The rest of our extended family is still in Argentina, and they all told him he was crazy when he first moved. How are you giving everything up in Argentina and all that? But for the next 50 years, they kept telling him what a visionary he was and how brilliant he was for having done what he did.
The visionaries are always crazy before people realize that they were creating the future.
That's true. And so, I went through a phase, I guess, like many of us did in the 60s, the Vietnam War and the hippie era and all that stuff. Many people when they're young kind of take a left turn, and I was no different. I was, part of the sort of hippie era, and, went to University of Texas in Austin, which was kind of a left-wing town, and at that time, but I got my degree there, and then kind of couldn't figure out really what I wanted to do next, and then I decided I wanted to go overseas for a while, and I went to Europe for a year, and lived in Paris for a year, and just doing odd jobs, working as a bartender and taking French lessons at the Alliance Française.
And how old were you at this point?
I was 22 years old.
Fantastic time to do that.
And so I was trying to decide what to do, and I also played a lot of tennis as a youngster, and so I got jobs teaching tennis at country clubs and did that for a while and trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life. And then I finally, after a year in France and then another year back in the States working at a country club, I decided that life wasn't really for me and that I should get serious and do something more serious with my life. So with my background in languages and my travel experience, I decided to go get a master's in business at a school called Thunderbird School of Global Management, which focuses on international business. And the student population at the time was about 25% international students. It was kind of the first school to really focus on international business. All the other schools that have international business programs kind of came after Thunderbird. And so it was in Arizona. And so when I got my MBA there, I was recruited by Merrill Lynch International in New York and went to work on Wall Street. And I was there for 10 years, living in Manhattan, having a wonderful bachelor experience. And as soon as I got out into the workforce, I started to see what the taxes were doing to me in New York, living in New York, and also just getting much more involved in the business community and reading the financial press, and also having gotten a business degree, I became much more aware of and started to move a lot more to the right.
Now, had you been thinking about this before you got your MBA or went into the workforce?
No, I started to sort of move right when I was in MBA school and to understand how the economy really works.
It was the experience of business that did it for you.
And then actually getting into the workforce really cemented all that for me. So by the time 1980 rolled around, I was working actively on the Ronald Reagan campaign, and I never, voted for another Democrat again. In the early 80s, the second great influence on my life came. My father was the first, but the second great influence on my life I met in about 1981. I was on a business trip in Guatemala, and one of my clients down there said, "There's a guy here you have to meet. He's founded a university, and he's a member of the Mont Pelerin Society. He's been a president of the Mont Pelerin Society. He's friends with Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek and all these guys. You should really meet this guy." And so she arranged a meeting for me with a guy named Manuel Ayau. And so we met. We hit it off right away, and Manuel was the kind of guy that would, any opportunity that he could add value to his students, he would take it. And the first thing he asked me, here I was from, Wall Street firm in New York, and he said, "Well, what are you doing this afternoon?" And I said, "Well, I'm free. What do you need?" And he said, "Well, why don't you come and give a little talk to my graduate business class about Wall Street and about in particular, I'm covering the options market right now, and I know you're an options principal and you know a lot about options. Why don't you come talk about the options market to my graduate business students?" And I said, "I'd be delighted to do that." And so I went to the campus. It was not on the current campus at the time.
The current campus looks like something out of Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. It's something designed by Howard Roark.
Yeah, it's absolutely beautiful, the current campus, but it was not so pretty back then. But the feeling I got from the place was very special even at that time, and I got to be very close to Manuel, and I started to do a lot of work with him and his family, and we were friends for many years, and until he passed away in 2010. I would go to Guatemala 3 or 4 times a year and see him and the family, and always go to the campus, and I was a bit involved, and I became very close to the rector that came after him, Giancarlo Ibarguen, who was also just a brilliant man. But Manuel introduced me. I had not read in business school or in undergraduate school. I had not read Friedrich Hayek. I had not read von Mises. I had not read really much of Milton Friedman. I had seen the Free to Choose series on TV, public television, but that's about the extent of it. But Manuel gave me a bunch of books, and I started reading Hayek and von Mises, and
did you start to apply those ideas to your work afterwards?
Yes, and just my whole thinking, it changed completely, and I just started to see everything through a sort of Austrian lens.
So how did you start applying that in your work afterwards?
Well, it just more in terms of how I was active in politics, and sort of how, the kinds of people I would support, and the kinds of, because I was always active, and even to the point, even when I was on the left, I was the founder of the first mock convention that my high school ever had, back in the 60s, and this was the 1968 election, where we have RFK Jr. Here with us, but I remember that campaign election very well because I was actually a fan of his father, and I was very moved when he was shot, and it was actually a very, very distressing event for me in my young life, and. But no, I had always been fascinated with politics. I always would watch, even actually in the 1960 convention. I was only 8 years old, but I watched both conventions, gavel to gavel. I was fascinated by the whole process, and so politics has always been like my hobby. And so, but now taking it more from a libertarian standpoint. Of course, I've never been a member of the Libertarian Party because as it's currently constituted in the United States, I mean, it's just it's not a serious venture.
It's a two-party system. It's set up that way.
Exactly. And so you can't really get anything done. So my focus has been to try to get the Republican Party to be more libertarian. And so that's kind of how I've been focused. So what I do, I mean, I can never see myself not working. People say, well, when are you going to retire? I've been doing this for 45 years, and I just can't imagine myself as a retiree. I've just asked myself, what would I do with my time? But I do have a lot of outside interests, and I do have a lot of things that take a lot of my time that are not work related. In fact, my wife is always saying, you're not going to accept another thing, not again, aren't you doing too much already? And so I'm on the board of directors for an organization called the Inter-American Institute for Democracy. I started the Miami Freedom Forum at the request of Grover Norquist from Americans for Tax Reform, who's a friend of mine and has these meetings all around the country. And when I was at his meeting in Washington, one time he took me to lunch afterwards and said, would you like to start one in Miami? And I said, I'd be happy to do that. And it's been a big success. People really are happy with the level of speakers that we get, and people, I'm getting speakers call me now that want to be on the program. So it's been very, very interesting. And I'm also, since I travel a lot and I have an international job, foreign policy has always been very interesting to me. So I'm involved in some foreign policy groups. I'm close to our senator, who is on the Foreign Relations Committee and on the Intelligence Committee, and he's one of the few people in Washington that gives a hoot about what's happening in Latin America. Which is unfortunate because we're really losing ground seriously there, and particularly in the recent decades. It's alarming, actually, what's happening in Latin America right now. Yeah, the Chinese have made incredible incursions in the last decade and a half there, and it seems like we're not answering the bell at all. And in fact, to the extreme that we're sending negative messages, like John Kerry coming out when he was Secretary of State and actually saying that the Monroe Doctrine was over, it was history, and which basically announced to the world that Latin America was open for business for everybody else. Come on in, do what you want. We have China training soldiers in Cuba. We have Russia training, sending soldiers into Nicaragua, and nobody's saying anything about it in Washington. So it's pretty disturbing.
So we kind of glossed over what I think is one of the most interesting parts of your background, which is your career on Wall Street and what you did there and how that ties in with your advocacy for liberty and supporting the growth of the liberty movement. I wonder if you could share a little bit about your time there.
Well, what's interesting about it is that on a daily basis, since most of my clientele is from Latin America, and so I'm dealing with people every day who live in countries that have a completely different liberty situation than we have in the United States. And in fact, the reason that they do business with me and that they have substantial assets in the United States is because they never know, when they might have to get on a plane and with the shirts on their back and make a new life somewhere else, like the Cuban. I live in Miami, which is the home of the Cuban diaspora, and many of my friends are Cubans, and I have friends that came over with Operation Pedro Pan, and came over without their parents. And people that have come under all kinds of circumstances, people who were prisoners for years, in Castro's prisons. And there's a deep appreciation in Miami for the liberty movement and for liberty and for what it means. And that's why, you've got some of the Latin vote, Hispanic vote. I mean, the Mexican vote in Texas or the Puerto Rican vote in New York, tends to vote left in many cases. But the Cuban vote in Miami is rock solid in terms of, because they know what it's like. They know what socialism takes you to and where it always winds up. And not only did we get the Cuban diaspora, but we also have the Venezuelans now have come in droves, and there's a huge Venezuelan community in Miami now, particularly in the Doral area. And we have a ton of Nicaraguans there as well. So this whole, socialism of the 21st century that we've seen, growing in Nicaragua and Bolivia and Venezuela and other places has caused this flight of people, but also flight capital. So, my business depends on, to a certain extent, or it grows more when people are less comfortable about their situation in their home countries.
So you're helping them find places where they can make investments in the United States.
That's what I do. I do global investments, but mostly in the United States markets, publicly traded markets, U.S. equities, U.S. bonds, U.S. treasuries, but also I invest in European stock markets and other developed countries. But the idea is that this is their nest egg, their patrimony. This is where they will still be wealthy when all hell breaks loose in their home countries. And so for them, they see it. This is a very important component of their wealth. These are all people that have very successful businesses in their home countries, but they don't know if that business will someday be expropriated, or if or what could happen. There's not a lot of confidence in the governments down there. They're very very quirky in terms of one day you're in good graces of the government, and then the next day some new caudillos in charge, and
it's inherently risky in other countries. The political situation is not as stable necessarily as it is in the United States or others. But are there other factors that make investing in the United States or outside of the rest of the Americas different from what they're used to, that you help guide them through, or is it pretty much the same?
For example, I just heard somebody at one of the talks share that there's the misery index. It's been compiled by one of the economists. I don't remember which economist at which university, but there's a misery index now that they rank all the countries in the world based upon a formula that's based on inflation, unemployment, and a series of other factors. And it turns out that there are 3 Latin American countries in the top 10, and including Argentina, my home country, which is interesting because Argentina is a country that is blessed with all kinds of natural resources. I mean, it's a country that is extremely rich, and God blessed Argentina with fabulous, arable land, natural resources, oil, minerals, everything that you would want, plus an educated population, generally speaking. But what he didn't bless them with is decent politicians. So, we've had just misrule for decades and decades and decades, and for Argentina to be in the top 10 in the misery index is just a travesty, really, when you think about all the blessings that country has, and that's just completely policy driven, and that there's just no other explanation for it.
What do you think about Javier Milei's presidential run right now?
Actually, he's tanking. He had been looking good, and then there have been some scandals, some sort of corruption issues, and he's really been tanking in the polls. He's about half where he was about 3 months ago, and it doesn't look like he's going to be the guy. So, do
you think there's any hope for Argentina?
Frankly, I would like to think there is, and I do think but there is just this bedrock Peronista vote that just seems to just never go away, despite all the evidence to the that it just doesn't work, and it has never worked, and it never will work. There just seems to be this bedrock, 35, 40%, that's the floor, and so to get through that, I mean, it's very difficult, and and unfortunately, the right people on the right it's never one option. It's there's always 4 or 5 different options, and so the anti-Peronista vote is always divided, and so they always wind up sneaking back in. So it's it's very disappointing.
Now, we've talked a lot about you helping people from Latin America access the U.S. and global markets, but there's an increasing idea that more American companies should be working with other countries across Latin America, nearshoring being a more common term, or regionalization becoming more prominent. What are your thoughts on U.S. companies starting to connect more with other countries across the Americas right now, and what advice would you have for any of them that are considering that?
Well, there's been quite a bit of movement towards, Mexico over the last 30 or 40 years has seen a lot of, manufacturing moving down there with the whole maquiladora movement, and, but still, the manufacturing is still China-based to a large extent, and that's still a very big problem for us. When you think about all the components we need for ammunition and for practically everything that goes into a fighter jet and everything that goes into all now we have a federal government that's trying to move everybody into electric vehicles. Well, so it turns out that we are self-sufficient in the fossil fuels, but if we go to electric vehicles, practically everything that goes into an electric vehicle has to come from China. And then you look at, we just went through the pandemic, which came from China, by the way. Practically all the pharmaceuticals, all the prescription drugs come from, are made in China, or many of them. So, our healthcare is largely dependent on China now. So, we've gotten to a point, I'd like to see more of that. Move to Latin America. It's not happening fast enough. I mean, we like I say, we had that sort of push into the maquiladoras, but that sort of slowed down when AMLO got in power. I think that was going better with the previous administration, but I think that we definitely have to find a solution for our dependence on on Chinese manufacturing. Yeah, I think that's a huge problem.
I completely agree. And that's why I'm increasingly interested in how many companies are looking to Latin America.
Well, I think a big problem with our State Department just kind of ignoring Latin America and letting the Chinese move in. For example, I was in Argentina recently and talked to a guy who's in the telecom industry. He says, well, listen, the U.S. isn't coming down here and offering to build out our 5G networks. The Chinese are. They're coming and bringing, Huawei is coming down and everybody. But the deal is that they put in all their equipment, And then their surveillance technology is unbelievable. I mean, and in fact, the Chinese, there's a law that they passed in 2017, which basically says anybody who partners with China, I mean, there allows us to go in and get whatever information we want. So, basically, their surveillance capabilities are unbelievable, and because they're getting in all the technological areas, in all the communications networks and all the things, the communications networks in all of Latin America, they're going to be able to spy on all the Latin Americans and us through them. So, I mean, this base they have in Cuba now is nothing but a spy station. I mean it's there to spy on us, and nobody seems to be, and now they're training Chinese soldiers in Cuba, and where is the administration on that? I'd like to know. I think all of this is very alarming.
Agreed, but we need to do something about it. And I know that you actively are, not just through your businesses, but through so many connections that you made over your career and lifetime and the many organizations you're a part of. And I want to respect your time, so wrap this up with one last question. And as background, I've always believed that the best way in order for people to get things is to offer value first, and that it's so important for people who want to learn or get connected with others to offer to do something for others. And so if anyone's listening to this and also impressed by what you're doing, what you care about, and wants to support you in some way, wants to work with you, what could they volunteer to do that you would respond to in a positive way?
Well, they could support the Inter-American Institute for Democracy, which is an organization that I'm proud to be associated with, and we do a lot of educational efforts. And I think really a lot of this is about education, and not only in Latin America, but in the U.S. And a lot of people have been critical of our governor for his push into education issues, but frankly, this is where we're losing the battle, is in education. I mean, our kids are coming up with very, very poor education in civics, very poor education in history, very poor understanding of the Constitution and the things that made our country different and great. And actually, they're taught to hate the country, with the critical race theory and all these other things. This is all cultural Marxism at work. This was all planned out in the 20s by guys like Antonio Gramsci and the Frankfurt School, and in the 30s, and they basically realized that for successful countries to become communist, you had to work through the what they call the long march through the institutions. You had to work through academia, the media, and through education from kindergarten on up, and they've done that, and most people haven't noticed. And so people say, well, DeSantis talks too much about education, and yet I think that's really where we're losing the battle. And Ronald Reagan used to say that we're never more than one generation away from losing our freedom, and every generation has to be taught again what made us great and the principles that make our country great. And if we don't do that, I mean, so it's really about education. Everything. That's why I work so much with UFM. That's why I, almost all my hobbies and passions have to do in some way, indirectly or directly, with education. Because people, the more they know about their history, the more they know about the country, about our founders, about the Constitution, the more likely we are to stay out of trouble. So,
Here. Well, Rodolfo, thank you for everything that you're doing. Thanks for taking the time to share this with our audience today.
My pleasure. Very much so. Thank you, Alexander.